All right, let's talk a little bit about the French and Indian War. There's not that many slides, but it's going to take a little bit of explanation. The French and Indian War was part of a wider war involving most all of Europe. It's called the 7 Years' War, and you will learn more about that when you go to high school and study European history. At first, the French were winning the war in North America, but in 1757, William Pitt, and that name should sound a little familiar to you, but we'll talk later, was elected Prime Minister of Britain. And he was getting a little bit tired of the British getting kicked around in North America, and he went to the king with a plan. And his plan was to flood more troops into North America. And he said, Your Majesty, I can get control of this situation if you just give me the men. And it's worth you to remember that this is a military strategy, and I will come back to it again and again this year. When you flood more people, more men, more troops on the ground, you will gain control of a situation. Now, there are certain instances where if it's not just a single battle and you're trying to maintain control over time, if you don't keep the men there, you lose control. But in this case, it's just he wants to kick the French out and be done. And he is successful. So let's take a look and see how he does that. All right. His goal is to not just get the French out of the Ohio River Valley, but he also wants to conquer French Canada, which is a bit of an overreach. But he has got some success with this because he begins to have some success. He drives the French out of parts of Canada, and he recaptures Fort Duquesne. Remember, that was the fort that the British had started, but the French took over, and then Washington went in there to try to take it back, and he was driven away. So he recaptures Fort Duquesne. And when the British take that fort back over, here's where it becomes fun. They rename that Fort Duquesne, they rename it Fort Pitt in honor of Prime Minister Pitt. And they call it Fort Pitt, and then it becomes the current city of, yes, Mrs. Butts is a huge football fan, the current city of Pittsburgh, where the mighty Pittsburgh Steelers play, because that's how I usually try to remember things. And of course, they're not my favorite team because they're rivals of my Bengals, but that's okay, they're a good team. So, but back to history. Anyway, they renamed it Fort Pitt, and the tide of war began to turn. So when they began having some wins here up in the Northeast and towards Canada, the French began retreating for a bit, and then when they did, they could chase them back into Canada, back into places like Quebec and Montreal, which are actually across the border. Kind of scared the French, and it ended up the Battle of Quebec being the turning point of the French and Indian War, which is important. If you see something boldened on one of these slides, it's because it's probably tested. So pay attention. Battle of Quebec was the turning point of the French and Indian War. It was thought by the French that it would be impossible to attack the city of Quebec. But not only did the British attack Quebec, but they attacked Montreal. And so in 1763, in the city of Paris, that's what treaties are always named after the city that they're signed in. So that's why it's named the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris, 1763, France was forced to give up its land east of the Mississippi River to England and west of the Mississippi River to Spain, and then give up the port of New Orleans to Spain also. And so it pretty much puts France out of the picture as far as land south in North America. They still had a foothold in Canada, but not anything south of there. All right, the problem was this. There were Native Americans in these lands, and the Native Americans were not happy with the French defeat because they were friends with the French. They, of course, like I said, some Frenchmen had even married in with the Native American tribes, and the French had been dealing with the Native Americans for many, many years. And the French were not there to farm. The French were not there to colonize. The French were there to trade and trap and be gone. The British, however, when they began moving onto Native American lands, were there to occupy it, to colonize it, to farm it. And the Native Americans didn't like it. So there was an uprising by a group led by a man named Pontiac. And yes, again, you should be familiar with the name because cars are named after him. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting how we name things after people. This was along the Pennsylvania and Virginia frontiers, so it's not that far west, really. It's up against the Appalachian Mountains. This is going to be a problem because the settlers want to move west, but it's not really safe. And so there's going to become some irritation between the British government, who they're going to put policies into effect that are going to block the British settlers from using it, the British colonists from using the land. And the British colonists don't like this because they feel like they have fought and died to be able to use this land. They've helped the British government drive the French off the land so that they can use it, and now the British government's telling them they can't and they don't like it. The Proclamation of 1763 is what put this in place. It was exactly the same year as the treaty was signed. King George signed this proclamation, and it said they cannot cross the Appalachian Mountains. Now, on the king's side of things, if you're thinking like the king, if he's trying to protect his colonists, his subjects, it's his job to protect these people, he can't. There is no way he can put enough troops on the ground west of the Appalachians to make sure all these people are safe. It is a big area, and he can't do it. There's not enough money, there's not enough men to do it. And so he doesn't want them to go over there. Now, if you're the colonists, you probably feel like, yes, I'll travel at my own risk, just leave me go over there and use the land. But the king says, no, you can't because you're going to be slaughtered. So there's two sides to this story. But the colonists only see, of course, their own side, and they don't like it. They feel like they've fought and died. They put British uniforms on and fought alongside the British soldiers, and they want to be able to use the land. And additionally, the king would like to tax these people to help pay for the war, and they don't want to do that either. So it's setting up a whole system of problems that lead up to the revolution. Again, I just said what's on this slide. The colonists resent the proclamation because some of them or their family members had fought and died for the right to use that land. Even if they hadn't put on a British uniform, they had fought alongside the British soldiers. They had helped the British soldiers out. And the land there is rich farmland. If you look at the map below, that area, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, that is all good farmland, and they want to use it. In addition, at that same time, remember we talked about the Navigation Acts, but Britain is also going to put some more, tighten up the navigation rules on the colonists at this time, honestly, because they know they've been smuggling and they don't want them to smuggle anymore. So there's a lot of irritation at the same time that all this is going on, and just that you need to know that this is what's helping to lead up to the revolution.